We open in absolute, suffocating darkness. The only sound is a ragged, desperate gasp for air, close to the microphone, as if we are inside someone's lungs. Then a rhythmic metallic scrape, clawing. A sliver of blinding daylight stabs the darkness. A small, bloody hand reaches through the gap, pulling at splintered wood. The camera pushes through the hole, into the chaos. This is Sasha's view. He is buried in the rubble of his own home. Plaster dust coats his tongue, his eyelashes. He is not crying. He is operating on a pure animal instinct to see light. He pulls himself free, collapsing into what was his kitchen. A single untouched calendar on the wall shows June 1941. A cast-iron pot lies shattered on the floor, dried borscht, staining the wood like old blood. Sasha's mind does not process the devastation. It clings to a fragment from hours before. A memory, vivid and assaultingly bright. The sun is high. Sasha is on the roof of the shed, a conqueror. Below, his father Pyotr is not just fixing a motorcycle. He is performing a symphony. He hums a Tchaikovsky melody, his hands moving with confident grace from wrench to valve. This is their ritual. Sasha, from his perch, is the lookout for enemy forces, stray cats. His mother Anna hangs laundry. Each sheet she pins is a white sail on a green sea. She catches Sasha's eye, smiles, and performs a mock salute. His little sister Masha sits on the porch, conducting an invisible orchestra with a spoon, her doll as the audience. The sound is a perfect hum of bees, distant radio music from an open window, and his father's tuneless humming. Back in the ruin, Sasha's body moves without him. He sees his father's wrench, half melted, lodged in a collapsed beam. He pulls it free. The metal is warm. He doesn't look for bodies. His mind refuses. Instead, he sees Masha's doll. One glass eye stares at him from under a mound of bricks. He picks it up, stuffs it into his pocket, next to a smooth river stone he was saving for his slingshot. These are his artifacts now. He stumbles into the street. The town is a painting of hell. People move like ghosts. A man cradles a ticking alarm clock, its bell muffled by his coat. Sasha's gaze is drawn upward, not by sound, but by a sudden shadow. A wounded German bomber, one engine trailing black smoke, limps across the sky. From its belly, like metallic eggs, fall several small objects, not bombs, canisters. They hit the ground a street away with dull thuds, not explosions. A strange, hissing green smoke begins to billow. A new kind of fear, silent and creeping, grips the survivors. Sasha doesn't run. He watches the smoke, fascinated and horrified by its unnatural color. This is not the loud war that took his family. This is a silent, poisonous one. He turns and walks the other way, the wrench a cold, heavy weight in his hand. The world fractures into a second perspective. Lyonya is underwater. The cold of the Neva River is a shock that steals his breath. Bubbles stream from his mouth. Below him, sinking into the murk, is his father's leather satchel, the one that held his precious radio parts. Lyonya doesn't think. He kicks, diving down, his fingers brushing the smooth leather. He grabs it. As he surfaces, gasping, the sound hits him. The bridge is gone. Where his parents stood moments ago is a twisted sculpture of iron and flame. He remembers their last seconds not as a blur, but in hyper-detail. His father, Yuri, wasn't looking at the plane. He was looking at Lyonya's mother, Lena. He said nothing. He simply touched her cheek with the back of his hand, a gesture so tender it was a secret. Then he pushed her and himself into Lyonya, trying to be a human shield for them both. The force of the blast separated them. It was that touch, not the explosion, that now burns in Lionya's mind. He swims to a burning pier. The satchel is safe. He clutches it to his chest. His other hand finds his pocket, feeling for his talisman. A German mechanical pencil, a pre-war trophy of his father's. It's gone. Panic, sharper than the cold, seizes him. He frantically pats his pockets, his eyes scanning the oily water. It is a loss that feels catastrophic, final. His father's memory, condensed into that object, is gone. He crawls ashore. People run past him, their mouths open in silent screams. His hearing is gone, replaced by a high-pitched whine. He sees a militiaman grabbing people, shoving them towards evacuation trucks. Lionya's training, the cold, logical mind of an engineer's son, kicks in. He is alone. He is a liability. He must become data, not a person. He opens the satchel. The delicate copper coils and valves are miraculously intact. He reassembles the primitive receiver with shaking, numb fingers, using a piece of wire from the pier's wreckage as an antenna. He presses the crystal earpiece to his deaf ear. At first, just static. Then a ghostly, fragmented voice breaks through. All civilians, east, crossing at coordinates, orders, life. The voice is a thread, back to a world of order. He doesn't hear it. He feels its vibration in his skull. He will follow that signal. It is all he has. The perspective shatters a third time. Valya does not crawl from rubble or swim from a river. She emerges from the earth itself. She had buried herself under a mound of loose soil and leaves in the forest, listening as boots crunched past, as guttural voices called out. She waits an eternity in the cool, dark womb of the soil. When she digs herself out, the world is silent. The wheat field is a trampled, smoking ruin. She moves not like a girl, but like a predator, low to the ground. She finds the cart. One horse is dead. The other, a beautiful bay mare named Zaraya, stands trembling, a deep gash on her flank. Her father's work coat is draped over the splintered cart seat. Valya approaches the horse, whispering words that are not words, just a steady, soothing hum. She tears a strip from her own dress, binds the wound with practiced farm girl hands. Zarya nuzzles her, a hot breath on her neck. Only then does Valya look for her family. She finds her eldest brother, Victor. He is on his back, eyes open to the sky. In his hand, he clutches not a weapon, but a perfect, unbroken stalk of wheat. She pries it from his stiff fingers. She finds her mother, curled around the empty space where her youngest brother must have been. She does not find her father. A coldness settles over Valya, a clarity harder than diamond. This is not a tragedy. It is an equation. The men in gray coats did this. The answer is not grief. It is a tally. She takes her father's coat. It smells of sweat and soil and him. From the shattered cart, she retrieves two things: a small, sharp hay knife and a family photograph in a tin frame. She smears the frame with mud and hides it in the coat's inner pocket. She then leads the wounded Zarya into the deeper woods. She does not look back at the field. She has memorized it. At a shallow creek, she stops. She looks at her reflection in the blood-flecked water. A stranger with hollow eyes stares back. She takes the hay knife. With grim determination, she hacks at her long, braided hair, sawing until it falls away in uneven clumps. She picks up the stalk of wheat from Victor's hand and tucks it behind her ear. She puts on her father's oversized coat, rolling the sleeves many times. The transformation is complete. She is no longer Valya, the daughter. She is something else, a survivor, a tally keeper, a boy in a man's coat. Night falls, a blanket over 3 separate hells. Sasha walks down a railway line, the ties echoing under his feet. He carries the wrench and the doll. In the distance, he sees the flickering fires of a military encampment. He stops. He is not ready for people. He climbs into an empty, gutted freight car on a siding. He curls up in a corner. From his pocket, he takes out Masha's doll and the river stone. He places the stone carefully in the doll's lap, as if it is an offering. He then takes the wrench and begins to tap softly, rhythmically, against the metal floor of the car. Clink, clink, clink. It is the exact rhythm of his father's humming from the memory. He is trying to summon the ghost of the melody, to rebuild the world one tap at a time. Leonya huddles in a drainage pipe under a road. He has the satchel clutched to him. In his palm he now holds a new object, a bent, discarded bolt he found on the road. He is using it to scratch lines onto the pipe's concrete wall. Not words, a schematic, a diagram for a better, more powerful receiver. His face is a mask of focused obsession. The whine in his ears is his world now, and he will build a machine to talk to it, to decode its message. In a dank thicket, Valya tends to Zarya's wound. She has made a small hidden lean-to. She takes out the mud-smeared photograph. With meticulous care, she cleans only one face with her thumb, her father's. She leaves the others obscured. She then takes the hay knife and drives it hard into the soil beside her, a sentinel. She lies down, pulling the coat tight. Her hand rests on the knife's handle. Her eyes are open, watching the shadows. The stalk of wheat remains behind her ear. It is not a decoration. It is a promise. The chapter ends, not with a fade, but with a hard cut to black, the silence after the last image searing into the viewer. 3 children are gone. In their place are 3 raw, open wounds of purpose, waiting for the only thing this new world can offer them, a war to belong to. The dawn is not a sunrise, but a slow leaching of gray light into the world, revealing its new, sharp edges. It finds our 3 survivors, not as children, but as solitary predators in a denatured landscape. Sasha's freight car is no longer a sanctuary. It is a trap. The sound of approaching engines, not planes, but the grinding tread of heavy vehicles, freezes his rhythmic tapping. He peeks through a splintered board. A column is moving parallel to the tracks. German infantry, gray-coated, moving with exhausted discipline. They are close enough for Sasha to see the stubble on a young soldier's face, the steam from his breath. One of them, a corporal with a sharp, avian face, pauses, his head tilting as if he heard the faint clink. His eyes scan the train cars. Sasha's heart is a frantic bird in his chest. He does not pray. He calculates. The doll and the stone are in his pocket. The wrench is in his hand. He looks at it, this piece of his father. It is not a tool now, it is a weapon. He knows if the soldier comes, he will have to swing it. The knowledge is cold and clear. He crouches, muscles coiled, a cornered animal. A shout from the column. The corporal's attention snaps away. They move on. The immediate danger passes, but the lesson is branded into Sasha's soul. Stillness is death. He must move. He waits an agonizing hour before slipping from the car and melting into the skeletal forest beside the tracks, moving away from the German line of march, guided only by a primal sense of a way. Leonya's world is the schematic on the wall and the static in his ear. He has left the drain pipe. He now occupies the husk of a burned-out village schoolhouse. His hearing has returned in patches, a deafening ring punctuated by sudden, jarring clarity. He has scavenged a broken battery, a length of wire from a shattered lamp, and, most precious, a child's magnet from a physics textbook. He is not trying to contact anyone. He is building a sentinel. His theory is simple. Different troop movements create different radio frequency disturbances. He hunches over his creation, connecting the scavenged parts with an obsessive's focus. His hands are black with soot and dried blood from minor cuts. He is no longer Lyonia, the sun. He is the architect of his own early warning system. When a distant artillery barrage begins, miles to the east, he doesn't flinch. He adjusts a coil, his ear pressed to the speaker, noting the change in the pattern of the static. He is mapping the war. He survives on stolen food. A jar of pickled tomatoes from a collapsed cellar. Raw potatoes frozen in the ground. He eats mechanically. His only luxury is the act of drawing new schematics in the margin of the schoolbook, improving his design. He is waiting, but not for rescue. He is waiting for the signal to mean something more than just noise. He needs a destination. Valya and Zarya are a single organism. The horse's wound is healing cleanly, thanks to her care. They move at night, following the distant thunder like a compass pointing toward the front. Valya is no longer just hiding. She is hunting for information. She discovers a skill she never knew she possessed, a preternatural ability to read the land. She sees where grass is bent against its grain by passing boots. She distinguishes between the deep tread of a German boot and the shallower imprint of a Soviet one. She finds a discarded cigarette packet, German. A little later, a twist of coarse rolling paper, Russian. The front is a fluid, snarled thing here. One afternoon, from a ridge overlooking a muddy road, she witnesses a brief, vicious skirmish. A small squad of Soviet soldiers, cut off and ragged, ambushes a German scout car. It is not a glorious battle. It is a messy, brutal exchange of fire at point-blank range. Valya watches, her face stone. She sees a young Russian soldier, maybe 17, hit in the leg. He falls behind a log. His comrades, under heavy fire, are forced to pull back, disappearing into the forest on the other side of the road. They leave him. The Germans secure the area, then move on, taking their wounded. The field goes quiet. The wounded soldier tries to crawl, leaving a dark trail in the mud. Valya watches for an hour. He stops moving. As twilight bleeds into the landscape, Valya moves. She is a shadow in the undergrowth. She reaches the soldier. He is unconscious, breathing in shallow hitches. His face is pale, caked in mud and sweat. He is just a boy, older than her, but a boy. The equation in her mind wavers. This is not the faceless enemy. This is a broken piece of her own side. She acts with swift, silent efficiency. She uses her hay knife to cut away his bloody trouser leg. She tears strips from her own shirt to make a tourniquet, using a stick to tighten it, just as her father had shown her for a farm injury. She packs the wound with clean moss. He moans but does not wake. She cannot carry him. She cannot stay. Then she sees it. Stitched onto his tattered uniform shirt, almost torn off, is a small embroidered insignia. A red arrow piercing a blue line, a unit patch. She rips it free. Looking at the soldier's face, she makes a decision. She takes his nearly empty canteen and fills it from a clean stream. She places it and the last of her stolen root vegetables within his reach. She takes his bolt-action Mosin rifle from where it lay in the mud. It is taller than she is. She also takes a half-empty pouch of ammunition from his belt. She leaves him there, a life debt acknowledged, but unpaid. The rifle is heavy, alien in her hands, but it is a real weapon. The tally keeper now has a tool for her accounting. She returns to Zarya, hides the rifle in a bundle wrapped in her father's coat, and moves on. The patch is clenched in her fist. It is a clue, a thread. Their paths converge not by design, but by the grim geography of war. A major river, a key defensive line. The Soviet side is a frantic hive of activity. Trenches are being dug, logs hauled, barbed wire strung. The air smells of damp earth, diesel, tobacco, and fear. Sasha arrives first, drawn by the sheer mass of men and machines, a terrifying but magnetic force. He observes from the tree line for a full day. He doesn't see an army. He sees individuals, a cook, swearing at a smoking field kitchen, a burly sergeant with a magnificent mustache, patiently showing a terrified young recruit how to fit a bayonet, an older soldier with kind eyes sharing a cigarette with a shivering sentry. Lyanya arrives by following his ears. The concentration of radio noise is overwhelming, a constant buzzing orchestra. He finds a camouflaged communications dugout, its antenna a complex web of wires. He watches fascinated as signals operators crank field telephones and scribble messages. This is the brain. He needs to be near it. Valya finds the unit. She matches the patch on her scrap of cloth to the insignia on the side of a battered truck. The 284th Rifle Division. She leaves Zarya hobbled deep in a copse of trees, a painful but necessary separation. She walks into the camp, not as a girl, but as a feral, filthy creature in a man's coat, her hair a hacked mess, the stalk of wheat still tucked behind her ear. She carries the rifle slung across her back. Soldiers stop to stare. Some laugh. One calls out a crude joke. She ignores them all, her eyes scanning for authority. The moment of collision is not dramatic. It is bureaucratic and brutal. A harried, red-faced lieutenant named Grishin, responsible for supply and other nuisance issues, finds all three of them within an hour. Sasha, caught trying to steal a loaf of bread from the kitchen truck. Lyanya, discovered hunched over his homemade radio next to the comms dugout, accused of being a spy. Valya, who simply walked up to him and stared, holding out the unit patch. Grishin is exhausted. He has a missing bridge to defend and no time for strays. His first overwhelming instinct is to send them away, to the rear, to an orphanage that probably no longer exists. He takes them to the battalion commander, Major Orlov. Orlov is a different kind of man. Old for his rank, his face is a road map of fatigue and quiet sorrow. But his eyes are calm, observing. He listens to Grishin's frustrated report. He looks at the three children standing in his dugout, filthy, defiant, and utterly spent. He doesn't see children. He sees what they have become. Sasha, clutching his wrench like a lifeline, his body vibrating with a need to be useful. Lyanya, clutching his satchel of parts, his gaze flicking to the major's field radio with professional interest. Valya, standing rigid, her hand never far from the hay knife at her belt, her eyes holding a challenge that is decades older than her. Orlov looks at Grishin. He looks at the map on his table, at the red arrows indicating German positions a few kilometers away. He looks at the faces of his men, boys themselves facing oblivion. He speaks, his voice gravelly and final. Regulation 227. Not one step back. It says nothing about steps sideways. He sighs, a sound from the depths of the earth. The cook, Markov needs a helper. The signals platoon is shorthanded. And every position needs an extra pair of eyes. They eat what they earn. They stay out of the way. If the Germans come, they become the company's problem to protect or to avenge. It is not an adoption. It is a tactical assessment, a calculated risk. Grishin scowls but obeys. He assigns Sasha to the kitchen. Lyonya is sent to the signals dugout as a runner and fetcher. Valya is given to Sergeant Dobry, the mustachioed veteran, with a terse, "Make her useful, or make her leave." The children are not embraced. They are tolerated. They are given scraps of uniform, a padded jacket too large for Sasha, a pair of boots for Lyonya, a real soldier's cap that Valya pulls low over her eyes. They are fed a thin, greasy soup from Markov's cauldron. That night, as artillery rumbles in the distance, they find themselves in the same section of trench. They do not speak. They eye each other with the suspicion of wild animals. Sasha sits, polishing his wrench with a bit of rag. Lyonya tinkers with a broken field telephone handset. Valya cleans her newly acquired Mosin rifle with a solemn, ritualistic intensity. They are not a family. They are three separate pieces of shrapnel embedded in the flesh of the regiment. Their survival is now tied to the survival of this patch of mud and the men in it. The unspoken contract is sealed not with kindness, but with shared, desperate necessity. The war has given them a home. It is a freezing, filthy trench that smells of death and damp wool. But it has a purpose. And for now that is enough. The regiment does not become a family through sentiment. It becomes a machine, and each new part must prove its utility. Acceptance is not given. It is earned in the grim, mundane economy of survival. Sasha's domain is the universe of heat and hunger centered on Cook Markov's field kitchen. Markov is a mountain of a man with a permanent scowl and hands scarred by old burns. He is not cruel, but he is brutally pragmatic. He sees Sasha not as a boy, but as a pair of scrawny arms. His first lesson is not about cooking. It is about scarcity. Markov shows Sasha the stores. Sacks of grain with mouse holes, barrels of salted fish that must be inspected for rot, a precious can of American Tushonka meat, reserved for the wounded. "You waste nothing," Markov grunts, his voice like grinding stones. A potato peel is a spoonful of soup. A drop of fat is a day of warmth for a man. Sasha learns to stoke the fire with a precise, miserly cadence, to scrub the massive pot until it gleams, to slice the hard black bread into portions so exact they are almost mathematical. His wrench is always tucked in his belt. One day, a bracket on the kitchen's stove trailer shears off from the constant jolting over rough ground. The massive pot teeters, threatening to spill a day's ration into the mud. Markov curses, scrambling. Without a word, Sasha pulls his wrench from his belt. It fits the nut perfectly. With a few strong turns, he secures the bracket, his small hands performing the familiar, inherited motion. Markov stops, stares at the wrench, then at Sasha's grimly focused face. He says nothing, but later he leaves a small piece of hardened sugar on the chopping block next to Sasha. It is a transaction. Utility rewarded. Sasha's true value emerges unexpectedly. He is small and quiet. The soldiers, in their exhausted moments, barely notice him. He becomes a ghost, listening. He learns that Private Vasily, the sharpshooter, loves Zhiguli folk songs, but is too shy to sing. He learns that Sergeant Dobry's hands ache terribly in the cold from an old wound. He learns that the young medic, Lena, cries silently when she thinks no one is watching after losing a patient. Sasha does not offer comfort with words. He acts. He finds a relatively clean rag, and after scrubbing the pots, uses the last of the hot water to soak it, bringing it to Dobry for his hands. He polishes Vasily's sniper scope with meticulous care, though it was already clean. For Lena, he does the one thing he knows. He takes Masha's doll from his pocket and places it, sitting upright, on an empty crate next to her medical supplies. A silent, absurd gesture of solidarity. Lena finds it, stares, and for the first time in days, a faint, bewildered smile touches her lips. Sasha does not see it. He has already returned to the potatoes. But the soldiers see. They begin to call him not boy or urchin, but Nash Maley, our little one. He is becoming a function of their well-being. Lyonya's integration is a cerebral assault. The signals dugout is a cave of chaotic noise and intense focus. The commander, Lieutenant Korshinov, is a wiry, nervous man who communicates in barks and curses. Lyonya is initially treated as a nuisance, sent to fetch batteries or coil wire. Lyonya's mind, however, is a sponge for patterns. He watches the operators, their fingers dancing over Morse keys, their ears cocked to the static. His own homemade receiver sits in a corner, ignored. The ringing in his ears has settled into a permanent high-pitched tone, a personal frequency he lives with. It makes him a terrible runner for verbal messages, as he often mishears. But it heightens his other senses. He discovers his talent during a German artillery barrage. The shelling is random, terrifying. The men hunker down. Lyonya, pressed against the dirt wall, has his eyes closed. He is not praying. He is listening through the ringing. He hears a sequence, not the explosions themselves, but the brief pauses between them. 3 quick impacts to the north, a longer pause, then 2 to the southeast. It is a pattern, a rhythm. He crawls to the crude map table. Without asking, he takes a pencil and makes tiny, precise marks where the shells landed, based on sound. He connects them with dashed lines. He sees it. The Germans are walking their fire in a methodical grid, searching for the command post or the artillery positions. He taps Lieutenant Korshinov on the arm, points to his markings. Korshinov, annoyed, glances at it, then does a double take. His eyes dart from the map to the trembling boy, then to the ongoing bombardment. He barks an order. A runner is sent to the mortar platoon with a correction based on Lyonya's deduced pattern. 10 minutes later, the German shelling ceases abruptly. Counter-battery fire from the Soviet mortars, now repositioned, has found its mark. The dugout is silent, save for the distant crump of the successful strike. Korshinov looks at Lyonya as if seeing him for the first time. He doesn't praise him. He points to a broken German field radio, captured in a skirmish. "Can you make it listen?" he asks, his voice stripped of its usual scorn. It is a technical challenge, a puzzle. Lyonya's eyes light up with a pure, cold flame. He nods. He is no longer a runner. He is an analyst. His war is fought in waveforms and silences. Valya's path is the most direct and dangerous. Sergeant Dobry, her assigned guardian, is a veteran of the Winter War. He has no time for coddling. He tests her immediately. He hands her a water canister. The forward listening post. 1/2 kilometer that way. Don't get lost. It is not a kindness. It is a potential sacrifice. The route is open, potentially under observation. Valya doesn't flinch. She takes the canister, her face blank. She doesn't go straight. She moves like a fox, using gullies, burned-out husks of vehicles, the shadow of a shattered wall. She has learned the land. She returns an hour later. not just with the empty canister, but with a precise report delivered in a low, monotone voice. 2 enemy machine gun positions 300 meters west of the birch grove. 1 mortar team setting up, near the burned tank. They did not see me. Dobry's bushy eyebrows rise. He takes her on a scouting patrol that night. Valya is a natural. She moves silently, her senses attuned to every rustle, every shift in the wind. She points out a tripwire he had missed, gleaming faintly in the starlight. She is not brave, she is preternaturally aware. Survival is her only instinct. Dobry begins to teach her, not as a daughter, but as a junior scout. He shows her how to read a map by touch in the dark, how to distinguish the silhouette of a German helmet from a rock, how to use the wind to mask sound. He gives her a real, sharpened, entrenching tool to replace her hay knife. She accepts it with a solemn nod. Her moment of cementation comes during a tense, silent reconnaissance near a German-held village. They are observing a supply route. A German soldier steps away from his post to relieve himself, coming dangerously close to their hiding place in a thicket. Dobry freezes, his hand on his knife. The German is close enough to hear them breathe. Valya acts. She doesn't look at Dobry. She makes a soft, low sound in the back of her throat, the exact distressed bleat of a young hare. It is a perfect imitation, a sound from her lost farm life repurposed for war. The German soldier pauses, chuckles softly to himself, and finishes his business, turning back to his post without a second glance. Dobry looks at her, his eyes wide in the darkness. He gives a single, slow, incredulous nod. From that moment, she is not the girl to him. She is Strelek, Sharp Eye, a tool of immense value. A week after their arrival, the first true test comes. A German probing attack hits their section of the line at dawn. It is not a major assault, but a violent, chaotic skirmish. The world dissolves into the roar of gunfire, the whistle of bullets, the acrid stench of cordite. Sasha is not in the kitchen. He is in a supply trench, ordered to stay put. But he hears the shouts for ammunition. He sees a runner go down, a clip of rifle rounds spilling from his hand. Without thinking, Sasha scrambers from his hole. He grabs the clip, then another and another, stuffing them into his oversized jacket. He becomes a small, fast, low-moving creature, darting from firing position to firing position, delivering the precious metal lifeblood. A bullet kicks up dirt inches from his foot. He doesn't scream. He just flattens himself, then crawls the last few meters to a machine gun nest, pushing the clips toward the gunner. Lyanya is in the signals dugout. The lines are cut. Communications are down. He ignores the panic around him. He crawls to the broken German radio he has been repairing. With steady hands, he connects a final wire. He tunes it, not to transmit, but to listen. He hears the German platoon commanders' frantic, clear orders over their own network. Push left flank. They are weak there. Lyanya scrambles to the map, stabbing his finger at the location. Korshunov barks new orders, rerouting reserves to plug the gap. Valya is with Dobry in a forward shell crater. When the attack comes, she doesn't fire her rifle. Dobry told her not to. Her job is to watch. She lies beside him, her eye pressed to a periscope. She is the unit's extended sight. She calmly reports movements. 3 infantry moving behind the hedge, crew setting up a light mortar near the well. Her voice is a flat, calming stream of data in the midst of hell. The attack is repelled. The cost is 3 wounded, 1 dead. The air is thick with smoke and exhaustion. That evening, in the fetid trench, the dynamics have shifted. The soldiers are too tired for speeches. But when the thin stew is handed out, Cook Markov gives Sasha a portion with a discernible chunk of meat in it. Lieutenant Korshinov absent-mindedly tosses Lyonya a captured German chocolate bar. Sergeant Dobry cleans Valya's rifle for her, a gesture of profound respect. They sit together, the three of them, eating in silence. They do not speak to each other. But Sasha, noticing Lyonya shivering slightly in the cold, scoots a fraction closer, sharing a sliver of warmth from his padded jacket. Lyonya, in turn, offers a piece of the chocolate to Valya. She looks at it, then at him, and gives a single sharp shake of her head. But a moment later she pulls the stalk of wheat from behind her ear, now brittle and dry, and carefully breaks it into 3 equal pieces. She places one piece on the crate next to Sasha, one next to Lyonya, and keeps the third. They are not friends. They are not siblings. They are 3 components of the same machine, their gears finally meshing. The regiment is no longer just their shelter. They have become its nervous system, its eyes, and its hidden, beating heart. The currency of belonging has been paid in full. The account is now open. The line held. The regiment dug in deeper, a scar upon the earth. A fragile, weary routine settled, punctuated by artillery duels and sniper fire. The children were now part of the organism, their roles defined and valued. This fragile equilibrium was the anvil upon which war would hammer its first devastating lesson. The lesson's name was Private Pyotr Petya Ivanov. He was not a hero from a poster. He was a lanky, 19-year-old former literature student from Kiev, with glasses mended with string and a perpetual, slightly bewildered smile. He was terrible at soldiering. He fumbled with his rifle, got lost on simple patrols, and wrote long, unsent letters to a girl named Anya on scraps of paper. He was the unit's comic relief, but his kindness was absolute. He was the one who shared his last pinch of tea, who patiently helped Lyonya adjust the clumsy fit of his boots, who wove small, clumsy figures from straw for Sasha, calling them guardians of the kitchen. Petya adopted them all, but he had a special, gentle connection with Sasha. He didn't see a miniature soldier or a mascot. He saw a boy who had lost his father. One evening he found Sasha staring at his wrench, running a thumb over its familiar grooves. Petya sat beside him, not speaking for a long time. Then from his tunic he pulled not a letter, but a small, battered book of Pushkin's fairy tales. He began to read aloud, his voice soft, weaving a spell of magic woods and talking pikes over the distant thunder. Sasha didn't look at him, but his grip on the wrench slowly relaxed. For 20 minutes, the war receded. Petya became a bridge back to a world where stories mattered. His death was not glorious. It was stupid, wasteful, and small. A rumor swept the trenches. A supply truck had made it through to the rear, and it carried real mail, and more importantly, real tobacco. A collective craving, sharper than hunger, took hold. The stretch of road to the rear was intermittently shelled, a deadly lottery. Command forbade unnecessary movement. Petya, however, saw Sergeant Dobry staring hollow-eyed at an empty tobacco pouch, grinding his teeth with a craving that was physical pain. Dobry had saved his life twice. Petya, wanting to repay, to do one thing well, volunteered. "I'm fast, Sergeant. I have lucky feet," he said with his awkward smile. Dobry, worn down, gave a grim, reluctant nod. Sasha saw him go. Petya gave a jaunty, foolish wave in Sasha's direction, miming smoking a pipe, before ducking out of the trench and into the blasted skeletal landscape. The wait was an hour. It stretched, thin and taut. Sasha abandoned his potato peeling, climbing to a firing step to watch the road. Lyanya, in his dugout, found himself unable to focus on the radio's hum, his ear straining for a different sound. Valya, on watch with Dobry, saw the sergeant's jaw clench tighter with each passing minute. They all heard the distinctive shriek of the incoming mortar shell. It was a single, lone round, a random harassment shot. Statistics. Bad luck. The explosion was a dirty puff of smoke and earth 100 meters down the road. Silence followed. Then movement. A figure stumbled out of the smoke, clutching a small parcel. It was Petya. He was walking unhurried. A wave of relieved laughter started in the trench. The fool had done it. Then Sasha saw it. The walk was wrong, too stiff. Petya took 5 more steps, then paused, looking down at his own chest as if puzzled by a stain. He slowly sat down in the middle of the road, then carefully lay back, placing the parcel of mail and tobacco neatly beside him, as if setting a table. He did not move again. The laughter died, strangled. The world seemed to hold its breath. Dobry was the first to move, a roar tearing from his throat. He lunged from the trench, sprinting through the open ground under potential fire, a massive, charging bull. No one ordered him to stop. The Germans, perhaps surprised by the sheer insanity of the act, didn't fire. What followed was not a rescue. It was a retrieval. Sasha watched, frozen, as Dobry reached Petya. The big sergeant didn't check for a pulse. He simply stared for one long, terrible second at the young man's peaceful, puzzled face. Then, with a tenderness that was more horrifying than any violence, Dobry scooped Petya's body into his arms, gathered the parcel, and walked back, slowly, deliberately, a giant carrying a broken bird. His face was a mask of such primordial grief that even the veterans looked away. The regiment buried Petya that night in the cold, hard earth behind the lines. Major Orlov said a few curt official words. Then Dobry stepped forward. He didn't speak. He opened the parcel. He took out a single packet of makorka, the coarse tobacco. He crumbled it in his huge hands and sprinkled it over the grave like bitter incense. "For your journey, poet," he muttered, his voice cracking. The impact on the 3 was tectonic, but manifested in silence. Sasha retreated into a deep, cold shell. That night, he took the last straw figure Petya had made for him, a lopsided horse. He looked at it, then at his wrench. The wrench was for fixing, for building. It was useless against the random arithmetic of a mortar shell. He placed the straw horse in his pocket, with the doll and the stone. His artifacts of loss were multiplying. He didn't cry. He went to the kitchen and began scrubbing the already clean pot with a frenetic, punishing energy. His small shoulders hunched against a world that took kind poets and left wrenches behind. Lyanya experienced the death as a systems failure. The random shell was data noise, an unpredictable variable. It enraged him. He became obsessed with predicting the unpredictable. He spent the next 48 hours hunched over his equipment and captured German radio, cross-referencing shelling times, weather patterns, even the faint background hum of distant generators, searching for a pattern in the chaos where there was none. His hands shook with fatigue and frustration, The high-pitched whine in his ears seemed to grow louder, a permanent scream for a logic the war refused to provide. Petya's death was an equation with no solution, and it threatened the very foundations of Leonya's ordered mind. For Valya, it was a confirmation and a corruption. She had seen death before, cleanly delivered by the enemy. This was different. This was death by stupidity, by a fragile human body in the wrong place at the wrong time. It made the enemy not just the men in gray, but the universe itself, an indifferent, murderous machine. Her cold calculus intensified. That night on watch, she didn't just observe the German lines. She studied them. She memorized the schedule of a sentry's walk, the exact location of a machine gun's firing port. She was no longer just gathering information for defense. She was compiling a list, a target registry. The stalk of wheat behind her ear felt like a dry, dead thing. She took it off, looked at it, and almost threw it away. Instead, she put it back. It was no longer a promise of home. It was a reminder of what was owed: debt. The regiment hardened. The easy laughter that sometimes followed Petya was gone. The soldiers looked at the children differently now, not as lucky charms, but as fellow passengers on a doomed ship. The loss had woven them tighter into the fabric of shared grief. A few days later, Sasha was tasked with taking a mess tin of food to the sentry, on the farthest, quietest point of the line. It was the post Petya had often manned, a lonely spot overlooking a swampy no-man's land. As Sasha placed the tin down, he saw something scratched into the wooden support of the firing step. In clumsy, deep letters, Petya had carved a single word: sweat, svet, light. Sasha stared at it. He touched the carving with his fingers. He thought of the fairy tales. He looked out at the gloomy, dead swamp, then back at the word. A slow, terrible understanding dawned in his eyes. This wasn't just a word. It was a rebellion, a declaration made in the dark. Petya, the terrible soldier, had been fighting a different war. Sasha didn't tell anyone what he found. But that night, he took his wrench, and in a hidden corner of the kitchen trailer, he began to make his own mark. He didn't carve a word. He didn't have Petya's poetry. With intense, focused precision, he used the corner of the wrench to etch a small, perfect schematic into the metal. A child's drawing of a radio tower, with tiny, looping waves emanating from it. It was a signal, a message to no one, a piece of Leonya's war joined to his own. The first loss was no longer just a death. It was an inoculation. The childhood that had been clinging on by a thread in each of them had finally been severed. They were now fully, irreversibly, soldiers. Their weapons were a wrench, a radio wave, and a sniper's patience. Their enemy was no longer just the Germans. It was the relentless, random cruelty of a world without light. And they had just learned how to carve their defiance in the dark. The regiment was no longer a place of refuge. It was a whetstone, and the children were being sharpened upon it. Petya's death had removed the last buffer of childhood illusion. What remained was a cold, focused potential. The officers, burdened by dwindling manpower and stretched thin, began to see not children in need of protection, but tools with unique, almost supernatural applications. The shift was subtle, ethical lines blurring in the mud of necessity. Sasha's transformation was the most physically dramatic. His small size and preternatural quietness, once used to deliver ammo or comfort, were now weaponized for reconnaissance. Sergeant Dobry, his own grief curdled into a ruthless pragmatism, took charge. He began training Sasha in earnest, but not as a scout. As a ghost. The lessons were brutal and specific. Daubry would hide a single spent shell casing somewhere in the ruins of a nearby village, under a collapsed beam, inside a chimney stump, submerged in a well. Sasha's task: retrieve it without leaving a sign he had ever been there. Not a footprint, not a disturbed stone, not a sound. He taught Sasha to read shadows, to move only when the wind rustled the grass, to distribute his weight like a cat. He coated Sasha's face and hands with a paste of ash and dirt to kill their pale gleam. Sasha's wrench was left behind. His tools were now his fingers, his eyes, and an infinite capacity for stillness. His first real mission was not to observe the enemy, but to confirm a suspicion. A local farmer, supposedly loyal, was suspected of signaling German artillery with a mirror from his attic. The man's house was in a gray zone, visible from both lines. Sasha was sent at the fragile hour between night and dawn. He became liquid shadow, slipping through fences, crossing a creek on a submerged log, merging with the rubble. He entered the house not through a door, but through a crawl space under the floorboards, his small body wriggling through spaces a man would never consider. He waited for hours in the stifling dark beneath the kitchen, listening to the farmer's boots pace above. At the precise moment of dawn, he heard the distinct, soft scrape of a tile being moved in the attic, a sliver of light piercing the floorboards above him. A minute later, a distant German mortar, silent all night, fired a single ranging shot dangerously close to a Soviet supply trail. The proof was delivered not as a report, but as a single jagged piece of mirror glass Sasha silently pried loose and brought back, its edge cutting his palm. He presented it to Daubry, his face blank, his bleeding hand closed in a fist. He had become a sensor, a living probe sent into the fatal spaces. The farmer was dealt with. Sasha did not ask how. Lyonya's war entered the realm of the abstract and the devastating. Lieutenant Korshunov, recognizing the boy's pattern genius, gave him a monstrous task: to find the heartbeat of the local German artillery battalion. Not their positions, which shifted, but their rhythm, their command syntax, their logistical tempo. Lyonya, surrounded by a nest of wires and captured equipment, became a digital vampire. He stopped sleeping. His world narrowed to oscillating dials and the flow of encrypted Morse, which he couldn't read but could feel. He discovered that German artillery units, efficient and regimented, had predictable silent periods for maintenance and resupply. He mapped their radio call sign rotations. He identified the faint, unique, carrier wave hum of their primary command truck. He wasn't listening to words. He was diagnosing a body's metabolism. He presented Korshunov not with a location, but with a timetable. A 10-minute window, predicted 3 days in advance, when a specific battery would be most vulnerable. Guns cold, crews eating, radios briefly switched for maintenance. The Soviet counter-battery strike was launched based on Lyonya's prediction. It was a chillingly precise act of violence. From miles away, Soviet Katyusha rockets, the Stalin's organs, screamed down, not on guessed positions, but on a schedule. The distant, satisfying thunder of secondary explosions confirmed his math. Lyonya received no praise. He simply noted the cessation of the target battery's radio signature on his logs. He took a ruler and drew a neat, precise line through its call sign. It was an erasure. He had killed men not with a bullet, but with a frequency. That night, the ringing in his ears morphed. It wasn't just a tone anymore. It felt like the echo of those distant explosions, a permanent resonance of the destruction he had orchestrated. He was no longer just listening to the war. He was conducting it. Valya's path was the most direct and intimate. Dobry had honed her natural talents into a razor's edge. She was no longer just sharp eye. She was becoming an instrument of calibrated retaliation. Dobry trained her on the Mosin rifle, but not for volley fire, for the single shot. He taught her windage, bullet drop, the mirage effect of heat on air. He taught her patience that bordered on the pathological. They would lie in a hide for 12, 18 hours, observing a single German position. She learned to identify officers by their posture and binoculars, radio operators by their hunched shoulders, machine gun teams by their routines. Her first kill was not a dramatic duel. It was an administrative execution. A German supply sergeant had established a habit of leaving his dugout at exactly 17:30 to urinate against a specific half-destroyed wall. He was fat, efficient, and utterly predictable. He represented the mundane machinery of the enemy that fed the front. Dobry gave her the order. That wall, tomorrow. He is a clog in their pipe. Remove it. Valya spent the night not in anxiety, but in final preparation. She cleaned the rifle for the 4th time that day. She selected a single, perfect cartridge, polishing its brass casing. At dawn, she and Dobry slipped into a pre-scouted hide, a collapsed cellar with a perfect, narrow loophole. She did not speak. She set up the rifle, adjusted the sight for the exact distance, 347 meters. She lay behind it, her breathing slowing, her body becoming an extension of the wood and metal. Hours passed. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope, focused on the stained, pockmarked wall. At 17:28, the German sergeant emerged, stretching. He walked to the wall, unbuttoning his trousers. He was a man in a moment of utterly human vulnerability. In Valya's scope, the crosshairs rested, steady as stone, on the center of his back. She felt no hate, no fear, no thrill. She felt the cold, smooth mathematics of the shot. The wind was calm. The range was known. The target was stationary. It was not murder. It was the solution to an equation Dobry had given her. She exhaled halfway, held it, and her finger took up the final fractional pressure on the trigger. The crack of the rifle was loud in the confined space. Through the scope, she saw the man jolt forward as if shoved hard, then collapse. There was no drama, no cry, just a sudden, terminal stillness. A clog removed. Dobry grunted, a sound of professional satisfaction. He pulled her back from the loophole. Now we go. Fast. As they retreated through the twilight, Valya felt no different. But that night, in the trench, she took out the tin-framed photograph. For the first time, she cleaned the mud from all the faces. Her mother, her brothers, her father. She looked at their smiling, frozen faces, then at her own hands. They were steady. She had added her first mark to the tally, but the ledger felt no closer to being balanced. It felt infinite. She took the stalk of wheat, now gray and fragile, and snapped it in half. One half she kept. The other she buried at the base of the trench wall. A ritual without meaning, an offering to a god she no longer believed in. The 3 children, bound by loss and the regiment, now operated in different layers of the same hell. Sasha, in the tactile, silent world of near-touch. Lyanya, in the ethereal realm of signals and predictions. Valya, in the lethal, precise space between crosshairs and a heartbeat. They were no longer mascots. They were specialists. Their childhood had been distilled into a set of lethal skills. The war had not just taken their families. It had re-engineered them into unique, terrifying engines of vengeance. And the front, sensing their new utility, began to hunger for more. The front line had stagnated into a festering wound. The opposing armies locked in a deadly embrace across the width of the Sinitsa River. The strategic key was not a hill or a town, but a single mangled remnant of pre-war infrastructure, the railway bridge. Its central span was a twisted skeleton hanging over the water, but the approaches on both banks were intact, heavily fortified by the Germans. For the Soviet command, it was a dagger pointed at their flank. For the Germans, it was the anchor of their local defense. Its capture was deemed impossible. Its destruction, however, was a necessity. The regiment was tasked with facilitating that destruction, not with a frontal assault, but with a surgical strike. A team of combat engineers would need to be guided to the underside of the Soviet-held approach to plant explosives on the key support piers. The problem was the gray zone, the 800 meters of open, marshy ground between the Soviet forward trenches and the bridge's massive concrete footings. It was a kill zone, swept by overlapping machine gun fire from the German bunkers on the opposite bank, and seeded with anti-personnel mines. No man could cross it, unseen. Major Orlov stared at the reconnaissance photos, a deep fissure of frustration etched between his brows. Then his gaze, heavy with reluctant calculation, fell on the 3 children who had just delivered his evening reports. Sasha, small enough to be missed. Valya, who could read the land like a map. Leonya, who could listen to the German machine gun post's radio chatter for changes in routine. The order was not given with sentiment. It was a tactical brief. They were not asked. They were conscripted. The plan was a terrifying clockwork of interdependent roles. Valya, with her supernatural patience, would spend the next 48 hours in a forward observation post, not just watching the German bunkers, but timing them. She would log the exact second each sentry was changed, the pattern of the sweeping searchlights, the brief, predictable lulls when all attention shifted to scheduled mortar fire on distant sectors. She would find the rhythm of the enemy's eyes. Leonya would monitor the German tactical network. His task was to detect any sudden shift, any alarm, any indication that the crossing had been spotted. He was the mission's auditory nerve. He would sit with a direct line to Major Orlov, a living alarm system. Sasha was the blade. His job was to lead. Not the engineers. They would follow their own expert. He would lead the path. Using Valya's timings, he would be the first to move into the kill zone, a small, dark shape testing the route she had theorized from afar. He would find the safe passage through the minefield, a path not of clear ground, but of specific, non-pressure plate spots between the mines, a ghost's footsteps only he could make. The night of the operation was moonless, the sky a bowl of black velvet choked with clouds. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rust. In the forward trench, the atmosphere was electric with grim tension. The engineers, laden with waxy blocks of explosives and coils of primer cord, checked their gear with silent, mechanical efficiency. Valya gave her final briefing to Sasha, not with words, but with a series of drawn symbols in the mud of the parapet. A circle for the searchlight sweep, its arc and duration drawn with a stick. Dots for sentry posts, with numbers denoting minutes between their visual scans. a dashed line representing her proposed route, a zagging, nonsensical path that utilized a shallow drainage ditch, the shadow of a shattered pylon, and a patch of reeds. Sasha nodded, his face pale but set. He wore a uniform blackened with soot, his hands and face smeared with a paste of mud and charcoal. He carried no weapon, only a dozen small white pebbles in his pocket. His wrench was tucked in his belt, a cold, familiar weight. Lianya was already in the command dugout, headphones on, his eyes closed in concentration. The ringing in his ears was now a tool, a baseline against which he measured every anomaly in the German radio traffic. He had memorized the normal sound of the front, the routine check-ins, the static. Any deviation would be a scream to his senses. At 2:17, Valya, watching through her periscope, raised a closed fist. The German sentries on the nearest bunker were lighting cigarettes, their attention inward. The searchlight began its long, lazy sweep away from the intended path. It was the window. Perhaps 90 seconds. A tap on Sasha's shoulder. He moved. He went over the parapet not with a leap, but with a silent liquid spill, vanishing into the darkness. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, 100 meters out, a single white pebble glinted dully for a second before being pressed into the mud. Mark 1. He moved not like a human, but like a thought. A pause, a dart, a freeze. He navigated by feel and memory, his body remembering Dobry's brutal training. He felt the ground with the sensitive balls of his feet before committing his weight. The drainage ditch was half full of icy, stagnant water. He slid into it without a ripple, becoming one with the black liquid. He placed Mark II where the ditch shallowed. He reached the edge of the suspected minefield. This was the heart of the gamble. Valya's path here was theoretical, based on the absence of visible cratering. Sasha had to make it real. He got onto his belly, slithering forward, his face inches from the mud. He moved with agonizing slowness, his fingers probing the soil ahead, like a blind man reading Braille, searching for the telltale rigid shape of a shoe mine or the subtle tension of a wire. He found one, not by touch, but by the faintest metallic scent of dew on painted steel. He edged around it, his breath a shallow rasp in his throat. He placed Mark III. Back in the trench, the seconds stretched into an eternity. The engineers, led by a grizzled sergeant named Gromov, waited, their eyes glued to the darkness where Sasha had vanished. Valya's whispered updates over the field telephone were terse. Searchlight turning. Now. Sentry 2 is facing north. Lianya's voice suddenly crackled over the line to Orlov, low and urgent. Static change. Bunker 4 is requesting a routine ammunition count. Normal traffic, but their operator is new. Hesitation in the Morse. Could mean nothing. Could mean distraction. It was an insight only he could provide, reading the personality behind the code. Orlov absorbed it, a new layer of risk acknowledged. Out in the marsh, Sasha faced the unexpected. The path led through the reeds, but they were thicker than anticipated, rustling with a sound that seemed deafening. He froze. The German searchlight was beginning its return sweep. He had seconds. He couldn't go through, he had to go under. He submerged himself completely in the foul, icy water of a shell hole, holding his breath, the reeds above him swaying. The beam of light passed over the spot, illuminating nothing but vegetation. He emerged, gasping silently, his body shaking with cold and adrenaline. Mark IV. He reached the massive, moss-slick concrete of the bridge footing. The objective. He placed the final pebble, a brilliant white against the dark stone. He had carved a ghost road through hell. A single soft click from his position. The signal. Gromov and his team moved, following the trail of pebbles with the precision of men walking a tightrope over an abyss. They were slow, methodical, their bulky shapes a stark contrast to Sasha's phantom passage. The work under the bridge began. The muffled tap of tools, the careful placement of explosives. Sasha, his part done, was to wait and lead them back. He huddled in a crevice in the concrete, a tiny, shivering shadow. He watched the German bunkers, their dark slits like malevolent eyes. He saw a sentry pause, peer out into the darkness, directly towards the reeds he had just crossed. The man stood there for a long, tense minute, then shrugged and lit another cigarette. In the command dugout, Lyonya's body went rigid. He heard it, a shift in frequency, a burst of encrypted traffic from the German battalion HQ to the bridge bunkers. It was a standard status request, but the timing was off schedule by 3 minutes. A random officer's insomnia or instinct. He reported it, his voice tight. Traffic spike. Query to bridge units. No alarm tone yet. Orlov had a choice. Abort and risk the engineers being caught in the open on the return, or trust the silence. He chose to trust. He ordered Gromov to expedite. Under the bridge, Gromov heard the whispered order. The final blocks were set, the primers connected. They began their retreat, faster now, less careful. Sasha rose to guide them, retracing his steps. It was the engineer behind Gromov who made the mistake. In his haste, his boot came down 1/2 inch from a white pebble, onto a patch of mud that hid a pressure plate. The sound was not the Hollywood blast of a mine. It was a sharp, vicious pop, like a giant light bulb exploding. A flash of white light illuminated the marsh for a split second, etching the horrified faces of the engineers, the crouching form of Sasha. Then screams. The engineer was down, his leg a ruin. Chaos erupted. From the German bunkers, flares shot into the sky, bathing the marsh in an eerie, drifting daylight. Machine gun hammers slammed down, streams of tracer fire stitching red lines through the reeds, searching for targets. All hell was loose. The mission was blown. Sasha, pinned down by fire, saw Gromov and another engineer drag their wounded comrade towards a shell hole. They were cut off from the pebble path, exposed. The German fire was zeroing in. In that frozen, illuminated moment, Sasha was not a soldier. He was a boy watching more men about to die for a path he had cleared. He didn't think. He acted. He broke from his own cover, not back towards safety, but towards the trapped engineers. He moved in a frantic, zigzagging sprint, not a ghost anymore, but a desperate, obvious target. He was drawing fire. Tracers ripped the air around him, chewing up the mud at his heels. He reached Gromov, his eyes wide with a feral intensity. He didn't speak. He pointed frantically to a low, dark line in the earth, a forgotten, water-filled cable trench he had noted on his initial crawl. It was not on the planned route. It was a desperate gamble. Gromov understood. They rolled into the trench, dragging the wounded man. Sasha went last. A bullet seared across the fabric of his padded jacket, spraying stuffing into the air. He tumbled into the icy water. The trench was a coffin with a narrow lid, but it provided cover. They began a desperate, splashing crawl away from the bridge, away from the pebble path, into uncharted, potentially mined ground. They were lost, but alive and moving. Back in the command post, Lyanya heard the panic in the German radio traffic now. Confirmed contact, requests for illumination flares, orders to sweep the area. He translated it in a rapid, monotone stream for Orlov, his own heart hammering against his ribs. Valya, from her OP, was now a spectator to a massacre, her calculated timings rendered useless by the chaos. She watched the tracer fire hunt for the shapes in the marsh, her knuckles white on the periscope handles, her face a stone mask of fury and helplessness. The team, led now by a bloodied and terrified boy's instinct, crawled for an hour through the frigid trench until it petered out. They emerged, disoriented, on the very far flank of the Soviet line, far from their intended return point. They stumbled into a startled sentry post, not with triumph, but with the ragged, gasping exhaustion of the damned. The explosives were set, the bridge's fate was sealed, but the cost was written in the blood soaking through the wounded engineer's bandages, in the 1,000-yard stare in Gromov's eyes, and in the violent tremors that racked Sasha's small body, now not from cold, but from the aftershock of a choice he should never have had to make. He had been a guide. He had become a decoy. He had saved lives. He had also irrevocably learned that in war, no plan survives contact with the enemy, and that the ultimate skill is not perfection, but the ability to improvise your own survival from the ruins of failure. The ghost had been seen, and he had lived. The successful demolition of the bridge was a strategic victory. A distant, satisfying crump at dawn signaled the collapse of the central span into the river, severing a key German supply artery. In the regiment's command dugout, it was marked on the map with a red slash, a tactical win. For the children, however, the victory was ashes. It tasted of stagnant trench water and blood. The immediate aftermath was a medical and psychological triage. The wounded engineer lost his leg below the knee. Sasha, hailed by the engineers as the reason they weren't all dead, retreated into a silence so profound it was alarming. He stopped eating the extra rations Cook Markov forced on him. He stopped polishing his wrench. He would sit for hours, staring at the wall of the trench, unconsciously rubbing the shallow furrow the bullet had plowed through his jacket. He had faced directed fire, had seen his body be the object of deliberate, violent intent, and a fundamental wire had snapped. The brave, instinctive sprint was over, and in its wake was a hollowed-out vessel. He started at sudden noises, his breath catching. The confident ghost of the marsh was gone, replaced by a jumpy pale shadow. Lyanya suffered a different fracture. The mission's failure, the chaotic spike in radio traffic he had detected but could not prevent, represented a catastrophic flaw in his system of logic. He had predicted the enemy's routine, but not their random vigilance. He had provided data, but data had proven insufficient. He became obsessed with the concept of the outlier, the unpredictable variable. He began constructing elaborate probability matrices on stolen graph paper, factoring in everything from the phases of the moon to barometric pressure, trying to model chaos itself. He stopped sleeping entirely, his eyes becoming dark, sunken pools. The ringing in his ears swelled, sometimes overwhelming the actual sounds around him, trapping him in a tinnitus prison of his own making. He was no longer just listening to the war. He was trying to solve its fundamental irrationality, and it was breaking his mind. Valya reacted with a cold, focused fury. She saw Sasha's trauma not as a wound to be soothed, but as a debt added to her ledger. The Germans had not just fired on the regiment, they had fired on her unit, on her responsibility. Sasha's flinch was an insult that demanded a response. Her scouting became more aggressive, her hide positions pushed closer to the enemy lines. She no longer just observed. She hunted for a target worthy of the debt. She found it. A new German sniper had appeared on the opposite bank. He was good. Disconcertingly good. In 3 days, he had taken out 2 Soviet machine gun crews and a company runner. He worked from a shifting series of positions, never firing twice from the same spot. He was a professional, a predator, who respected only his own kind. The Soviet soldiers nicknamed him Der Schatten, the Shadow. A low-grade paranoia began to infect the forward trenches. Valya requested through Dobry permission to hunt the Shadow. It was not a child's request. It was one specialist acknowledging another. Permission was granted not with encouragement but with grim understanding. This was no longer a game of observation. It was a duel. For Valya, it became an all-consuming obsession. She spent days studying the pattern of his kills, triangulating the possible firing positions, learning his schedule. He preferred the early morning hours when the low sun was behind him, and the hour before dusk. He valued patience over volume. He was, she realized with a chill, exactly like her. She prepared with a ritualistic intensity. She selected her best cartridges, annealing the bullets over a candle flame for consistency, a trick Dobry had shown her. She zeroed her rifle at exactly 400 meters, the estimated median range of his engagements. She constructed a hide so perfect it was nearly invisible, a ghost hole dug over 3 nights, its entrance camouflaged with a mat of woven grass and dirt, its interior lined with burlap to prevent collapsing. She would enter it hours before dawn and not move a muscle. For 2 days she saw nothing but crows and shifting light. On the 3rd morning, just as the mist was burning off the river, she saw a faint, almost imperceptible movement in a shell-blasted farmhouse window across the river. Not a head, not a silhouette, just the tiniest retraction of a shadow within a shadow. The shadow was there. A Soviet medic, foolishly exposing himself to check on a supposed wounded man in a forward crater, provided the bait. The shot, when it came, was a flat, economical crack. The medic's helmet spun off. He fell back, unharmed but terrified. Valya hadn't been looking at the medic. Her eye was pressed to her scope, her world the window. She saw the briefest wink of light, sun on a rifle scope's objective lens. Then nothing. He would relocate now. The hunt was on. It became a slow, deadly chess game, played across 400 meters of river and ruin. She would deduce his next likely position, based on angles of escape and fields of fire. She would wait. Sometimes she would sense she was being watched in return, a primal tingling on the back of her neck. They were 2 spiders in a web, each trying to feel the other's vibrations. The strain on the trio was pulling the regiment itself taut. Sasha's paralysis, Lianya's descent into abstraction, and Valya's single-minded absence created a void. The soldiers missed their little ones. The trench felt colder, more hopeless. The breaking point came from an unexpected direction. Cook Markov, the gruff mountain of a man, found Sasha staring listlessly at a pot of boiling water. Markov didn't speak. He walked over, took Sasha's hand, the one that still clutched Masha's doll in his pocket, and placed it firmly on the rough wooden handle of a ladle. He closed his own massive, scarred hand over Sasha's small one. He forced the motion. Scoop, pour, scoop, pour. The hypnotic, mundane rhythm of nourishment. He didn't offer comfort. He offered function. And slowly, over the course of an hour, the vacant look in Sasha's eyes receded, replaced by the familiar, automatic focus of the task. He was needed here. The kitchen was a system that required maintenance. He could fix this. Inspired, Lieutenant Korshunov staged an intervention for Leonia. He didn't talk about feelings. He brought a complex, brand-new German encryption device captured in a raid. It was a mess of wires and rotors, completely non-functional. "The Nazis are using a new cipher," Korshunov said flatly. "This is garbage, but the parts might be useful. Figure out if we can use it to hear them better, or if it's just junk." It was a puzzle, a concrete, mechanical problem with wires and solder, not probabilities and chaos. Leonia, his hands trembling slightly, reached for it. His analytical mind, starving for a solvable problem, latched onto the broken machine. The ringing in his ears faded into the background as he traced a circuit. He had a purpose within his reach. Only Valya remained in the grip of the hunt. It culminated on a still, gray afternoon. She was in her ghost hole, had been for 7 hours. She had pinpointed him. He was in a cunning hide, a fake rubble pile with a firing tunnel, near the base of a shattered church bell tower. He was waiting for a Soviet officer's scheduled trench inspection. Valya saw the officer, a young lieutenant, appear on the parapet. She saw the almost invisible shift in the rubble pile that was the German sniper, settling into his firing position. Her crosshairs were already centered on the dark slit of the firing tunnel. Her breathing was shallow, her finger on the trigger. This was it. The ultimate tally mark. The erasure of the shadow. At that exact moment, a memory detonated in her mind. Not of her family, of Petya. Of the kind, foolish poet lying neatly on the road, placing the tobacco parcel beside him. A life extinguished with random, stupid finality. She saw in her mind's eye the face of the German sniper. She didn't know it. He was a faceless shadow. But he was a man. A professional like her. Doing his job like her? He had a family, perhaps. He had a Petya in his past. Her finger froze. The calculus of revenge which had sustained her for months shattered. Killing this man would not bring back her brothers. It would not unbreak Sasha. It would not silence the ringing in Lyonia's ears. It would just be another entry in an infinite ledger. A pointless addition to the sum total of the world's grief. In her scope, the German sniper fired. The crack echoed across the river. The young Soviet lieutenant cried out and fell back, hit in the shoulder, not killed. The German had taken his shot, and Valya did not take hers. She watched, paralyzed by a new and terrifying emptiness. As the shadow in the rubble pile withdrew, mission accomplished, escaping unscathed. She had him, and she let him go. She crawled out of her ghost hole hours later in the full dark. She did not return to her own trench. She walked, numb, to the rear area where Zarya, her horse, was kept. She buried her face in the animal's warm, familiar neck, the smell of hay and horseflesh, a shocking assault on senses attuned to cordite and decay. She didn't cry. She trembled. The stalk of wheat was gone, buried. The tin photograph felt like a lead weight. She had reached the end of vengeance and found nothing there but a hollow echo. The three regathered that night, not by design, but by the magnetic pull of shared ruin. Sasha was by the kitchen fire, slowly stirring a pot, his movements deliberate, his eyes present. Lyonya sat nearby, disassembling the encryption device with calm, precise tools, his face a mask of technical focus. Valya walked in from the darkness, smelling of horse and forest, her rifle slung, her expression unreadable. They looked at each other. No words passed, nothing needed to be said. Sasha silently filled a mess tin with broth and handed it to Valya. She took it. Lyonya, without looking up from his work, held out a small salvaged spring from the German device. Sasha took it, looked at it, and put it in his pocket with the doll, the stone, and the spring. A new artifact of a different kind of salvage. The duel with the shadow was over. Valya had lost. Or perhaps for the first time she had won a battle against the war itself. They had each faced their personal abyss, cowardice, madness, and futile hatred, and had not fallen in. They were broken, yes, but they were broken together. The tally was closed. All that remained was to survive whatever came next. The war did not end with a bang, but with a slow, disbelieving unraveling. The thunder on the eastern horizon, a constant companion for years, began to stutter, then falter, then ceased. The news came not through official channels first, but as a contagion of rumor, then a crackling, hysterical voice over Lyonya's radio speakers, repeating a single word: Pobeda. Victory. In the trench, the silence that followed was more deafening than any bombardment. Men stood frozen, leaning on their shovels or rifles, faces slack with incomprehension. Then a single, ragged cheer went up. It was not joyous. It was a roar of release, of pent-up terror and exhaustion violently expelled. Cook Markov dropped his ladle and sat down heavily on an ammo crate, his great shoulders shaking with silent, heaving sobs. Sergeant Dobry stared at his calloused hands, as if seeing them for the first time. For the children, the moment was an anticlimax of terrifying proportions. The engine that had given their lives meaning, terrible and precise, had simply shut off. They were left stranded in a suddenly meaningless world. The regiment was to be disbanded, the men processed home or reassigned. An officer from the rear, crisp and clean in a new uniform, arrived with clipboards and orders. His gaze fell on Sasha, Lyonya, and Valya with bureaucratic puzzlement. They were a problem not covered by regulations. Sasha was the first to have his fate decided. A woman arrived, thin and worn, her eyes desperately scanning the faces of the soldiers. She was a distant aunt from a town Sasha barely remembered. She had survived the occupation, spent months searching records, following whispers of a boy with a wrench, with a regiment near the Sinitsa River. When she saw him, smaller and older than she remembered, she let out a choked cry. Sasha looked at her, then at Cook Markov. The big man gave a single, slow nod. It was an order, a release. Silently, Sasha handed his wrench to Markov. It was a gesture of profound trust. "Keep it for the kitchen," he murmured, his voice rough with disuse. "It fits the stove bracket." He kept his sister's doll, the river stone, and Lyonya's spring. His artifacts of war were packed away. He embraced Markov, a brief, fierce clutch, then walked to the woman without looking back. He was going to a home, but he left his family behind in the mud of the trench. Lyonya's solution came from the state itself. Major Orlov, in his final act of command, wrote a personal recommendation. It spoke not of a child, but of a signals prodigy who had predicted artillery windows and deciphered enemy rhythms. The recommendation, along with Lyonya's own intricate schematics and the captured radio he had rebuilt, landed on the desk of the Suvorov Military School. An invitation arrived. A future as an officer, an engineer. a life of order and purpose within a new, peaceful machine. Lieutenant Korshunov handed him the letter. Lyonya read it, his face impassive. He packed his satchel of parts. He hesitated, then took from his pocket the bolt he had used to scratch schematics on the drainpipe wall, his first tool of the war. He offered it to Korshunov. The lieutenant took it, a ghost of a smile on his stern face. "For the next puzzle," he said. Lyonya boarded a truck heading east towards academies and theory, leaving the ringing in his ears as a permanent souvenir of the front. Valya had no one and wanted no institution. Dobry, who had become more father than sergeant, faced his own mustering out. He was from the steppe, a man of open skies, going back to a farm that might not exist. As the regiment dispersed, he stood before her, his kit packed. He didn't ask. He stated, "The horse needs open land. My land is open. I have no children. You have no father. This is not a family. It is a tactical alliance for peace. Do you accept?" Valya looked at him, then at Zarya. She nodded once. There were no papers, no permissions. They simply left together, a grizzled veteran and a sharp-eyed girl who was no longer a girl, leading a battle-scarred horse. She left her Mosin rifle leaning against the command dugout. A tool returned. She kept her father's coat and the mud-smeared photograph. She did not look back. The final scene is not of farewells, but of a silent convergence, years later. 1952, a Moscow street, crisp with autumn. A young officer in the uniform of the Signal Corps, his posture perfect, walks with a purposeful stride. It is Lyonya. His face is leaner, the softness of boyhood replaced by a keen, analytical sharpness. The ghost of the ringing in his ears is always there, a private frequency. He carries a new leather briefcase. He turns a corner. A tram clatters past, revealing a work site. A new apartment block is going up. On a scaffold, a foreman in a worker's jacket barks orders. He is not tall but compact, competent. His movements economical. It is Sasha. He holds a blueprint, pointing to a structural beam. On his belt, in a worn leather holster meant for tools, is not a wrench, but a heavy, familiar-looking metal object. It is his father's wrench. He uses it to tap a bolt into alignment, the sound a precise, familiar clink. He is building, not fixing. Lyonya stops. He sees the wrench first, then the face. Sasha feels the gaze, looks down from the scaffold. Their eyes lock across 7 years and a universe of experience. No words. Lyonya gives a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a cadet's acknowledgement. Sasha's lips twitch in the faintest shadow of the smile he never used as a boy. He raises a hand, not to wave, but in a brief, open-palmed gesture of recognition. Then he turns back to his blueprint. Lyonya continues his walk. They do not speak. They do not need to. The same autumn, a vast collective farm on the Kazakh steppe. The wind whispers through endless seas of golden wheat. A woman drives a tractor, her hair tied back practically, her face tanned and serene under a wide-brimmed hat. It is Valya. The tractor is modern, but her hands on the controls are sure, born of an older intimacy with the land. On the horizon, an older man, Dobry, leans on a fence, watching the harvest, with a contented squint. Valya stops the tractor at the edge of a field. She climbs down, takes a canteen from the cab. She walks not to the farmhouse, but to a solitary, well-kept birch tree planted on a small rise overlooking the land. Beneath it are 3 simple stones, not graves, markers. One for her mother, one for her brothers, one for Petya, the poet-soldier who had no grave of his own. She stands before them for a long moment. Then, from the pocket of her work jacket, not her father's coat that hangs preserved in her home, she takes 3 fresh, perfect stalks of wheat. She bends and lays one gently on each stone, a harvest offering, a cycle completed. She stands, takes a drink from the canteen, and looks out at the thriving, peaceful land, her face calm. The tally is settled not in blood, but in growth. Final sequence. Lyonya's quarters, Moscow. It is evening. Lyonya, now Lieutenant Leonid Volkov, has removed his uniform jacket. He is in a simple room, orderly and clean. He opens a small, sturdy footlocker, not issued by the army, but older, scarred by shrapnel and weather. Inside there are no medals, no official documents. There is a worn leather satchel, its strap mended, a child's magnet, a tangled coil of copper wire, a single white river stone. Next to it, a tiny, grimy doll with one glass eye, a brittle, broken stalk of wheat, a small, polished bolt. He takes out these artifacts, laying them on his desk with ritualistic care. They are the relics of a faith, the holy objects of the Church of Survival. Finally, from the very bottom, he takes out a carefully folded piece of cloth. He unfolds it. It is a patch, embroidered with a faded red arrow piercing a blue line, the insignia of the 284th Rifle Division. He looks at these things, his face unreadable. Then he goes to a shelf and takes down a framed photograph of his graduating class from the Suvorov School. He places it beside the relics. He stands back, looking at the 2 collections, the evidence of the boy he was, the proof of the man he became. He does not smile. He simply nods, once to the ghosts in the room, to the men and the children they had been. He then carefully, reverently, returns each artifact to the footlocker, closes the lid, and turns the key. The war is over. The regiment is disbanded. But forever, in a quiet room in Moscow, on a scaffold over a growing city, and beneath a birch tree on the endless steppe, the sons and daughter of the regiment stand their eternal watch. They are not heroes of legend. They are the ones who remained, who carried the silent, unbearable weight of the peace they had bought, and who had learned, at last, how to live with the light.